My name is Malhotra, and I'm the project manager with the Clearinghouse. And I really want to just thank everybody so much for being with us today and joining us for the last 2 weeks. I was talking to a colleague yesterday and talking about how today was the last day of the Joining Hands virtual symposium, and I honestly got a little bit emotional. My team wouldn't be surprised because I'm a little bit emotional anyways, but I was just so excited about how this whole virtual program went and really didn't want it to end, and really enjoyed all the conversations we were having. As many recent on-site conferences, this virtual program originally started as an on-site event, but as a response to the pandemic, kind of has a negative tone to begin something new. We're moving to a virtual program because of the pandemic. But as the Ncde team began planning the program, we watched it evolve into this energizing, motivating, and creative platform that attracted almost 1,000 registrants from all over the world. And what did we see through this experience this last 2 weeks? Through this virtual platform, we heard from disability activists from all across the world about the impact of international exchange on disability rights. We had really in-depth conversations on disability and intersectionality with international exchange alumni with disabilities who identify with other diverse identities. We watched a movie together. Many of you joined us for Disability at the Movies, watching a short film, Opening Doors to College, discussing the hundreds of colleges across the US that are opening doors to higher education for students with intellectual disabilities, and then followed up with a discussion of what does study abroad look like as well, and making sure that we're not excluding this from students with intellectual disabilities. We also learned many practical tips, from building accessible virtual exchange programs to identifying resources and tools to support and fully integrate both American and international participants with disabilities and the broad range of international exchange programs. I could go on, and there was so much more that happened these last 2 weeks. I would really like to thank the Ncde team, Ashley Holben, Justin Harford, Joey Lenny Moran, for all of their work, creativity, and excitement for putting this whole program together. I also want to thank our team of support from MyUSA and our ASL and captioning team, in which we learned together while being apart in this new virtual environment. I've enjoyed these 2 weeks so much with all that we've shared and learned from each other, and especially to witness these new directions international exchange is moving into, with a growing commitment of practices for disability inclusion. I was sharing with another colleague that I believe if this virtual program happened 5 years ago, that the Ncde would be presenting most of the sessions, and this is more because not enough organizations and programs had the experience of supporting people with disabilities, and we're not taking that initiative to do more. But today, for this program, the Ncde invited the many professionals to share their practices and expertise in inclusion. With over 8 sessions, the Clearinghouse team, of course, supported and moderated all the sessions, but we presented one because there were so many more professionals that were sharing what was happening right now and all the practices that they were doing towards disability inclusion. We invited many diverse alumni with disabilities to share their experiences and impact abroad to encourage more people with disabilities to participate. So not only were there more professionals sharing their experiences, but there are more alumni. There were so many alumni through this virtual program sharing their experiences and the impact of their exchange programs. And not only that, we also had a number of international exchange professionals with disabilities share their insight as leaders in the field of inclusion and exchange. It's critical that we build the pipeline of people with disabilities in the field of exchange to be the leaders and decision makers to make the exchange field grow and continue to thrive. And this isn't only for the field of exchange. We have to build and invest in the next generation of disabled leaders in all careers. And that brings me to our 2 incredible guest speakers joining us today, who are these young, global-minded, thriving disabled leaders making waves not only in their local communities, but across the world. And to begin, first I'd like to invite Esma I'm going to say the name right, Gumberidze, to speak. And just to do a brief introduction, Esma was an ECA-sponsored Future Leaders Exchange Program, also known as FLEX alumna. She is Georgia's youth representative to the United Nations, a human rights defender, disabled activist, citizen journalist, and blogger. And Esma graduated from Ivan Zhagishvili Tbilisi State University with an undergraduate degree in law. Esma is co-founder of the Disabled Women's Initiative Group, the Platform for New Opportunities, and member of the Council on the Monitoring of Implementation, Protection, and Promotion of the UNCRPD with the Ombudsperson of Georgia. Esma is also an author and a host of the online radio show Beyond the Horizon on the radio My Voice of the Helping Hand and Young European Ambassador of the EU Neighbors East. With that, I invite Esma to share some statements with you all today. Welcome, Esma.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks the team for inviting me here today. First of all, when we speak about the disabled leadership, I cannot forget to mention the former, of course, US President Franklin Roosevelt, who had actually to do with sort of triple work. First, he had to do what he had to do as a politician. Second, he had to hide his disability. Unfortunately, back then, it was sort of required to for his voice and authority to be in place. And third, he had to, of course, create for himself an environment that he needed with all the accessibility possible at the point. And of course, the pandemic, on the one hand, gives everything sort of a negative intonation. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity, and we know that people move forward only when they're unhappy or dissatisfied with something, or mostly that's the case, at least. And this is why it really pushed us out of our comfort zone. And it's very important to move forward, not to stay in our comfort zone. And personally, I actually am afraid of the time when I will not be able, and I will be afraid of getting away and out of my comfort zone. I was acting back still in the middle school. I didn't know that it was civic activism, but I was writing a school newspaper. I studied it. I was hand brailing it, distributing it among the schoolmates. When I was sent to a camp, like when I was to study English, and the activities, the extracurriculars, when they were not accessible there, my mother and me wrote a letter to the Minister of Education, because being active at that camp was a condition for being selected to go to UK for a 2-week accelerated English course. And actually my whole class went and was sent to the UK, even though we were not selected based on being active at the camp, because we could not be competitive among sighted kids and non-disabled kids, as the activities were not properly designed at a point. And it was a time when when CRPD has not been ratified, when we did not have anti-discrimination law per se. But as I would study and I would learn in the civic education classes back then, of course we had Constitution, which said that everyone was equal. So essentially when I was trying to advocate for myself, I was using just that. And then there was a FLEX program, Future Leaders Exchange Program, in which I participated. And this is a program funded by the US government for Eastern European and post-Soviet countries, which sends high school kids to the US for 1 school year. And they stay at the host family there and study in a school. So I studied in a mainstream school in the US, and I volunteered, which was not a usual thing for me. I never would think about being a teenager and being able of teaching someone back here in Georgia, but this is what I would do in the US. I was tutoring a blind student with autism and tutoring him in teaching him Braille. I also went through the Mayusa preparatory workshop, where we were taught that we could volunteer everywhere we wanted. And so I also tried to volunteer at the pet shelter, but they wanted someone to stay with me all the time due to the liability issues. So I had to leave it pretty soon, but I, of course, continued tutoring. And I wrote about this in my essay, which I wrote to participate in the civic education workshop in Washington, D.C. And I was selected. It was a competition, and I went there at the civic education workshop. I was taught how to get around my school, which was 2,100 students. I was taught how to go to my elementary school where I was volunteering and tutoring. I learned many things, of course, living away from my own family, like making my pancakes in the microwave, cleaning the bathtub. I learned some typing on computer and practiced it a lot. And when I returned back home, I resumed my university. Well, I started my university studies. And the university administration, even though they had a Western education, some of them were Harvard alumni. I don't know why, but they were telling my parents to take me abroad, to take me to Europe to study, because they said we couldn't hire professors for her. And my mother at some point started looking up some universities in Russia, because that was the only country that she knew about and where she had some connections, and where my parents could take me without, any support, sort of. And I always resented. I never thought of studying there at that point. And we just told the university administration that in the contract with the student, it said that the university provides a student with the necessary environment. And as I was blind, for me, the necessary environment was passing the exams using the screen reading program with double exam time. Another accommodation and environment for me was that I needed someone to teach me how to get around the university, so give me some ability and orientation, which was done by the volunteers, of course, not by the professionals, because we simply don't have them in the country. Well, didn't back then. And then at some point, I asked them to just also provide me with volunteers who would read to me, because we didn't have any accessible reading materials. And it didn't work out, because volunteers, even though they were studying the same classes, they wouldn't read this, they wouldn't read that, because for themselves. So then I asked the university to hire a reading person for me. And here comes my first big lesson, which I didn't realize back then, but I realized much later, years later, that I should change this attitude that sort of not imposing additional costs on an organization. Because even when I do ask for assistance, even though I might be imposing the additional cost, at the same time, I'm giving opportunity to another person. An employment opportunity, an opportunity to travel maybe with me, to be in a nice hotel, but also opportunity to simply learn and to grow up, to learn how to interact with different people with different needs and so on. But this is something I learned much later, and many years onwards, when I would be asked if I needed a sighted guide, I would say, no, I don't need one. And I would ask just like other participants to take me around and so on. The next thing I needed to do, I wanted to share my experience. I didn't know what to do exactly. My mom told me to write, and I started writing about it. And my first activism was just writing and spreading awareness about what did I do in the US, how were my studies back at home. And then sort of, I was thinking I would be getting more feedback. But at that point, not so many blind children were interested. I presented at my school and shared experience about Flex program. I would say maybe 5 or 6 children were attending. But then, like, when years went ahead, we had 2 more Flex alumni from my school, which is, I would say, a lot, because we have only like 50 students in the whole school. So it's a fine number. So what I want to say here is that the effort not always gives the result right away, but it really does at some point. And one of my first meetings, so first thing, I didn't want to be involved in disability rights movement. I wanted to be more involved in politics and international relations from my very freshman year. But I started noticing at different mockings and simulations that my voice was not being given due regard. I would not be listened to. I would be interrupted. When I would raise hand, they wouldn't notice it. At the same time, I saw how much I was being invited to different disability related conferences. And I thought that I guess without self-advocacy, I will not be able to do what I want to do either. So I started appearing at these events. Then I started being more involved in policy making and commenting on draft laws, on strategies, on action plans related to human rights. For example, then we established the Disabled Women's Initiative Group, which now is already a registered NGO. And I just started participating in all of that. I also was volunteering through with some opportunities that Flex Alumni Network would let me know about, because we have monthly newsletters, we have there's a mailing list where they send simply opportunities of volunteering, trainings, jobs. And through that, I got involved in the youth work. I was camp counselor 3 times with the US Peace Corps. Then I also, through this one training, I went to another one and then to another one. And then I was involved in the peace building and confidence building event with the young people from Abkhazia, which is a conflict region in Georgia. It's currently occupied by Russia. And so what I want to say is that one opportunity creates another a lot of times. It's like a chain. You really, sometimes by missing one, you miss hundreds. And by taking one, you also take hundreds. Because from Flex, for example, alumni network, I found out about some trainings there. Then I found out about other trainings, about more. And I also started seeing the same people around, because there are not so many active people. And in the same sphere, you just start getting to know each other, especially Georgia is a small country of 3.7 million people. So it's really, it's really relevant. I also got involved in women's rights movement exactly through this disabled rights, because some of the women's activists was attending one of the conferences, and then she interviewed me, and then it was funded by NDI, and then NDI also gave me recommendation into a bigger European youth network, democracy network, which is called Eden, together with civil and political young leaders from 18 countries around Europe. And so these opportunities really took on. And then something else. I, of course, went on exchange programs twice after Flex. Well, I went to many countries, over 18 countries, but on the shorter programs. And with longer ones, it was EU-funded Erasmus Plus Credit Mobility, which took me once to Germany and another time to Romania. And I spent 1 semester in each of these countries. Actually, my private university did not provide this opportunity. And I learned from one student journalist who just came over to interview me because she needed it for her assignment as a student with disabilities. And she just mentioned this program to me. And I really thought about it. And next year I transferred to another university where again had to talk about all the accessibility features, self-advocate. I also had to, when I talked to their international department, they were, well, this is not our competence. We don't have to guide you this much. We don't have to guide you that much. But in the end, I spoke with our deputy dean and they reached out, and things really work out when you seek solutions and you don't just simply get angry, because this anger in the end is bad for you, not for the system, so to say. So it's very important to be looking for solutions. And it also is very important to remember those people who really sparked something in you. And through these, in these two, it was totally different from being in a host family, because this time I lived in the dorms in both countries. I also asked the universities to hire aiding persons for me who would accompany me places. I was taught how to get around like the immediate closeness buildings, such as cafeteria, a few university buildings. In Germany, I was studying in English and I didn't speak German, which was not easy for the cafeteria. I would ask my reading, like my aide, to read out the menu, and then she would circle what I needed to eat every day, and I would just show up the paper to the selling person at the cafeteria. So it really is about looking for solutions. Yeah, so in Germany at first they had an accessibility office, and they thought that their staff would be enough. But it turned out that she had only 10 hours per week and I needed, let's say, 20. So it was not possible for her to do it, and they had to hire another person. But even now, I was one of the few students with disabilities who did international credit mobility through long-term Erasmus Plus. So even now, the EU researchers often reach out to me and they're asking like about my experience, and are featuring me in different articles, and so on. Even being there abroad, I didn't stop sharing information about my life, how I was cleaning bathrooms on my own, how I was doing things, because this is what I lacked when I was in my high school. In like experience of older alumni, how they studied, how they got around, and so on. And in the end, people were really asking me and reaching out to me, how should we, what should we do when we enter the university? How should we self-advocate? Um, and it was a great achievement, sort of. Then also, I was involved there, especially in Romania. I attended there and spoke at the conference on volunteerism there. I reached out and went to their specialized school for the blind. We found it. There was a very open-minded English teacher who agreed to take me to the school, and she let me attend her classes and speak with her students and ask them questions and answer theirs. And I friended few of them on Facebook, and I told them about Flex program, and as it now is being implemented in Romania as well, I got few of them to participate. Um, so these things really got me to my UN Youth Delegate thing, which I have been, again, trying to be selected for 4 years. And it was my last chance last year to be selected, and so I was. And this is, of course, a mainstream thing. So I'm traveling around Georgian regions, speaking with different young people about their needs, about UN Sustainable Development Goals, about some opportunities that, for example, US or the European Union or other countries or organizations are offering Georgian youths. I also spoke at the General Assembly last year, um, and spoke about essentially on behalf of Georgia from the place of diplomat, because that's where typically the youth delegates from different countries speak. And I was one of, let's say there were 40 or 50 youth delegates from 40 or 50 countries. And I was the only one who had a visible and severe disability. And something else I would like to conclude with is we have this saying, nothing about us without us. But I think nothing without us would be much more valid, because everything is about us. Everything that concerns regular citizens, from education to medicine to peace and war processes. We have IDPs, so internally displaced persons who have disabilities. We have disabled persons who live on the occupied territories. So anything that concerns exchange programs, would that be political participation and any other things, all of them really do consider disability, and they really do concern disability. And one additional thing, a last one, I'm often asked, why, let's say, wouldn't one give up in the situation that I have? And one thing is, sometimes it's very easy and simple to just sit at home and not being useful and blame everything on others. But on the other hand, it's very hard to feel that you really don't matter and that you cannot make any impact on what's going on, what is going on around you. And it was interesting to see, actually, my first days of activism was when Georgia ratified the UNCRPD, and then there was the anti-discrimination law, and I saw how the journalists also involved. In my childhood, when I would see some editions about day centers, I would never identify myself with them, with children with disabilities who were there. So I didn't feel disabled because they were portrayed really vulnerable and really poor, quote unquote. And the second emotion was I was always crying because these journalists were really working in a charitable mode. And now more and more students are interested in people with disabilities and writing about them academic papers, even though they don't have relatives with disabilities, which is really really great. So nothing about us. And thank you, and I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you so much, Esma. And just with the audience, we're finishing at just 30 minutes past the hour. But if you have any questions, please share them in the chat box. And if we have time, we'll ask our two speakers today. And next, I'm going to invite Anna Landry to come on screen and for her statement. And just to give you a brief introduction, Anna is an alumna of the State Department's Critical Language Scholarship program to Brazil and is a student at Georgetown University. She is majoring in regional and comparative studies with a focus on Latin America and Africa. She serves the Washington, D.C. government as an advisory neighborhood commissioner and is also a disability activist focusing on the social and legal barriers faced by disabled people in the U.S. and Latin America. She is the co-chair of the Democratic National Committee's Youth Disability Council and a founding member of both the Georgetown Disability Alliance and the New Jersey Disability Collective. Currently, she works with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies on disability inclusive pandemic relief policies and is helping to expand the partnership scope to Latin America and the Caribbean. Anna's advocacy efforts have been featured in outlets including the Washington Post, Forbes, and others. Thank you so much, Anna, for joining us, and please take it away.
Thanks, Monica. And thank you everyone for having me. I'm really excited to be able to speak with you today. Like I said, my name is Anna, and I'm a student at Georgetown University in DC, which is where I've formed a lot of my thoughts and kind of ambitions about going into international disability policy and being a part of bringing our community, which spans the whole globe, to the forefront of policy. And like Esma was saying, ensuring that we're included at all levels on all issues, because we should be. And Monica wanted me to talk a little bit about my background and what I'm working on right now. So I'll do that very briefly and then talk a little bit about my abroad experience, some advice I have for others looking to go abroad who have disabilities, and how those programs can become more inclusive to those of us who want to be able to travel and do these programs. So like Monica mentioned, I've been working with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies lately. They're an organization that helps people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. So that includes our current COVID-19 pandemic. We've been doing a lot of work to ensure that people with disabilities have the supports they need, that they're not being discriminated against with things like medical rationing. And now we're beginning to expand our scope to Latin America and the Caribbean. And that's meant reaching out to a lot of disabled persons organizations, often known as DPOs, in those countries to try and get a sense of what they're dealing with, how we can connect with them, and ensure that we're working together to help local communities. And then in Washington, D.C., where I go to school, I represent Georgetown to the D.C. government, and it's kind of like a town council position. And I work a lot on local infrastructure, especially physical accessibility. You know, as a wheelchair user, that's just something that I have a specialty in. And Georgetown, for those of you who don't know, it's a very historic area, historic meaning inaccessible. So we have a lot of challenges that we're working on there. And then in my home state of New Jersey, I've worked a lot on Medicaid policy and Medicaid reform, especially on issues of personal care assistant services and employment, and just helping people get their services that they're entitled to through the state government, and also be able to thrive in a career and thrive in a family life and things like that. And eventually, I really hope to use my degree and my experience to examine disability policies and the common problems that disabled people have across borders, so that we can identify the best practices, you know, take a little bit from one country and what works well, and will it work in this different context, and really learn from one another. I think there's a lot of potential for creating spaces for activists and organizations across borders to connect with one another and form those kind of relationships so that they can better mobilize in their local communities. So one day, that's something I want to work more on. And then in terms of my experience abroad, I went to Florianopolis, Brazil, with the State Department's Critical Language Scholarship. And it was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done. As a wheelchair user, I struggled a lot with the inaccessibility of the physical environment, but it was also an amazing experience, and I had so much fun. I met amazing people. I still talk about it and draw on my experience all the time. So much so that I was actually planning on going back to Brazil this summer before the pandemic hit to do some research. And on my abroad program in Brazil is also really where I made my decision to go into international disability rights. Until then, I was really struggling with, should I do things domestically, or should I go into international relations, and maybe not from a disability perspective. But I really realized while I was there that what I wanted to do was unite those two interests in international relations, in disability advocacy. And most of that was because I got in touch with a local disability rights organization there. And we talked often, and we would hang out, and I would tell them about how things are in the US. They would tell me about policies in Brazil and how they were working or not working for people. And I think it was really formative for both sides to kind of get that other perspective and talk about different ways that they could mobilize and take pieces from the US, and I could take pieces from Brazil to really improve things. So now I want to talk a little bit about studying abroad and the advice I have for other people with disabilities who are looking to do it, because I know it's really daunting and really difficult, especially for those of us who do need significant accommodations. Like Esma was saying, it's not a walk in the park. You really have to work hard to coordinate it, and there's going to be ongoing challenges, but I think we would both say that it's absolutely, absolutely worth it. So I want to talk a little bit how I approached studying abroad. First, I really want to note how it requires you to be your own advocate. And Esma was also touching on this too, that sometimes you'll feel like when you ask for things, you're imposing some sort of extra cost on the organization, or you'll feel like you're being a nuisance. And that's really hard to get over. It was really hard for me to get over. But you really need to kind of remind yourself that this is your right. as a person with a disability, as just a person who lives in this world, you have a right to be included, to have the same experiences and opportunities that other people do. And you'll have to be the one, especially in these abroad environments, telling people what you need and pushing back a little bit if they're not willing to give that to you. And I know that can really be intimidating. So one of the first recommendations I want to give is that you should put a lot of thought into what program you go abroad with. You can just go abroad yourself. You can plan a trip independently, sometimes with a grant if you're lucky enough to do that. But I also encourage people who are going abroad for the first time to find an organization that's really going to be willing to work with you, who wants to see you succeed. And those are not common enough. I promise you I know that, but they do exist out there. And that involves some shopping around, some talking to different organizations. I had a lot of meetings and phone calls with 3 different abroad programs before finding one that I really was comfortable with. And for me, that was the State Department's Critical Language Scholarship Program. And I really encourage all of you guys to look into that. It's a fully funded program. They provide a ton of support, including housing and food and a stipend. And their staff went above and beyond to ensure that I had the supports I needed to safely and comfortably go abroad. I definitely had to take the initiative. You know, I had to upfront say, these are the things I will need if I'm going to go abroad with you guys. And I gave them this whole list. And it was probably a pretty intimidating list. But they looked at it, they said, okay, we'll get back to you. And they talked it over internally. They asked a lot of really great clarifying questions and allowed me to review specific pieces of equipment that they were going to buy, or look at the hotel room that they were going to put me in before actually booking it. And then they even came back and asked me what else they could do to make me the most comfortable or to ensure that I could have the best time abroad. It was really amazing, and it really exceeded my expectations. And I know that this isn't going to be every organization. It should be, but unfortunately it's not. But I really encourage you to look around, try a few, see how the people running it are responding to your accommodations. And you really want someone who's going to be your partner in this. And it's going to make all of the difference. Then once you become more experienced in what going abroad is like, you can feel more comfortable to be more independent and sometimes push harder and things like that. But for the first time, I really encourage you to do that. And if you're the first person with a disability or needing significant accommodations, going abroad with that organization, as I think a lot of us will be, for better or for worse, imagine the barriers that you're breaking down for the disabled people who will come after you. I kind of see this sort of integration as not only our right, but also our duty to ensure that other people who come after us will have an easier time. I also want to talk a little bit about finding role models and mentors. I always thought it was kind of impossible to go abroad until I met other people with my disability who were wheelchair users doing it themselves. And having people to look up to, people to go to for advice has made a really big difference in the possibilities I imagined for myself. So I really encourage you, if you see someone out there who maybe has experience in the same country or interested or region, or who has a similar disability to you and you want to ask about how they do it, reach out to them. A lot of times we'll be so happy to help. And that also includes organizations like MIUSA, which can help you either connect to other people or just give you advice that they have from their institutional knowledge. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the coordination and problem solving that you'll have to do when you are abroad. And some little anecdotes of how I handled some of these challenges in Brazil. When I first arrived, I was told that there was no wheelchair accessible transportation in the city, none. So I got to the airport and they put my wheelchair, which weighs 400 pounds, mind you, in the back of a pickup truck. And then they stuck me in the back of a regular car. And, you know, it worked, but it was not comfortable. And I immediately told my abroad coordinators, this isn't going to work. We need to find another solution. And so I did some research. I pushed them to do some research. And lo and behold, there were at least 3 private services for wheelchair accessible transportation that did exist in the city. It was just that they needed that extra push. I needed to advocate for myself in order to get us there. So I spent a lot of time doing things like this throughout the trip. And over time, I became more proactive. They became more proactive. And it became a learning experience and a really great partnership for both of us. And for those of you who, like me, see disability as a really important part of your identity and a source of community and a source of pride, I'd also encourage you during your trip to let that interest inform your activities. You know, connect like I did with a disability NGO in the area and talk about the challenges that they're facing, the issues they're working on, or just like make a friend. It can be a really awesome experience, and it also just helps to find someone who understands your similar challenges in an environment that might be a little bit alien to you, that you might still be struggling to feel comfortable in. So as a whole, the abroad process can seem really daunting, and it is difficult in a lot of ways, but with some self-advocacy and problem solving and really putting a lot of thought and planning into it, I promise you that it is possible. And if you go abroad, you'll have so much fun. And it'll really become, I think, as it has for most of us, a formative part of your experience and something that you take with you in the future throughout the rest of your life. And I also think another big reason that we should be a part of these exchanges as a whole is that we as people with disabilities have already developed a lot of these problem solving and adapting skills. We're kind of used to living in an environment that wasn't quite built for us, that maybe we're not always comfortable in. So a lot of issues that other abroad students might be experiencing for the first time are already issues that we've been experiencing for a while, just in a different setting. Plus, we have a lot of these special skills and perspectives to offer to our programs or to an organization that you're working for, maybe in a context that's abroad. I also think this is especially true of multi-marginalized disabled people who have other identities in addition to being a person with a disability that are going to give them a really interesting and a really rich perspective on their abroad experience. And practicing true disability justice really means centering those experiences of the most marginalized members of our community, meaning that we as disabled people really need to have our voices heard in international policy, in these different abroad experiences. Finally, people with disabilities, we're at least 15% of the global population. And you know, it seems like every few years those numbers, those estimates are rising. So we really should be 15% of abroad programs, if you think about it, 15% of the workforce of international organizations. Including disabled people in our organizations, as we're seeing now, has a host of productivity and social benefits. Plus, it's just the right way to do to have a full and inclusive society. And especially when working across borders where cultural differences are a factor, I think that my disability at least enables to be a lot more perceptive of the biases and the assumptions that exist in the world with regards to marginalized people. And I'm very in tune with the ways that other people respond to difference, both in terms of their own and those of others. And I think this especially is a really big value add to programs and organizations that work across borders. So I'll stop there. We have a couple minutes for questions for me and for Esma. And yeah, thank you guys again for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna and Esma. We do have some time for questions, so if anybody wants to chat it in the box, then we're happy to take those. And I'm also happy to unmute anybody if you wanted to share it that way as well. Let's see. Esma, this is Monica. We have a question. So we recently celebrated and are commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and wanting to see how that impacted you when you were in the US and if that kind of influenced anything for your work back home. So I'm going to unmute you.
Okay. I will try to also turn on my video.
Okay.
In just a sec.
And Esma and Anna, if you both want to turn your videos on.
Yeah, here. So with the ADA, yes, we have seen the anniversary related celebrations, especially the US Embassy has put some emphasis on these events. Of course, as I said, when I was in the US, things like mobility and orientation trainer that I had, or special education teacher, or school aide, all of these things, and the fact that I could study in the mainstream school and I could volunteer also in the mainstream school, but teaching and tutoring a blind student, also were maybe direct or indirect results and outcomes of the ADA and of all of those fights. We also here in this country have recently passed the Disabled Persons Rights Law, which is supposed to implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that convention we ratified 6 years ago. There is a lot of advocacy to simply establish a personal assistance service here right now. We're trying to speak about inclusive education programs at the higher education level, which we don't have. Right now, it's really left up to all the goodwill of the universities to accommodate, and also to the general anti-discrimination laws and provisions and accreditation and authorization standards, sort of to provide for accessibility and to provide the ground for claims, right? So if someone wants to maybe sue the university for not being inclusive and accessible. Yeah, but we do have inclusion programs in schools, more or less, meaning elementary, middle, and high school levels. They started piloting them since 2007. And yeah, but anyways, of course, we are sort of, perhaps we are going through the same fights right now that the US was going through, let's say, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And Anna, here's a question for you. Were there specific strategies or arguments, analogies that helped the coordinators in Brazil be more proactive, or was it more pointing out that some aspects of life were not working out well?
Yeah, so part of it was definitely analogies. You know, I would talk about the ways in which having to be lifted out of my chair in order to be transported somewhere, and then putting my chair in another vehicle was so difficult for me because my wheelchair is so integral to my mobility. It's like taking a part of my body and throwing it somewhere else and me hoping it'll get there at the same time I will and not be damaged and things like that. So certainly different scenarios and ways of thinking like that were helpful. But a lot of it was just me being very blunt and saying, this isn't working for me. We need to change it up. And at first I was very nervous to do that because when you're in a different country, a lot of times you're really worried about being culturally insensitive and saying something that's going to offend someone else. but these struggles that I was having weren't specific to US culture or Brazilian culture at all. It was nothing like that. It was just me being generally nervous about being in a new place. So I realized that and got over it and got over myself and started to really have this back and forth about this isn't working and being firm about changing it.
And Anna, did you document your Brazil experience through any stories, blogs, anything like that?
So I haven't published much about it. I definitely, kept a journal. That's something that our program encouraged us to do, especially because it was an immersion program to practice writing and reading the language. So, I mean, documentation for myself, a ton of pictures, but so far just that.
Yep. And journals in Portuguese.
Yes.
I just want to say that actually my family has been hosting CLS students here in Georgia since
that's
I returned
awesome.
from the US. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
I really encourage people to look into CLS. They have so many languages in so many places. A lot of them don't require any prior experience, so you can just jump in. It's really great.
Great. And I have one question, I guess, for both of you as we wrap up the symposium and kind of get started with our next steps going forward after the symposium. But we've spent a lot of time these last few weeks talking about disability inclusion and highlighting practices and disability inclusion in exchange programs. So what is one takeaway you would share to international exchange organizations? I know we've had a number of exchange organizations attend all the sessions and also this closing. So what would be one takeaway for them? And also just kind of addressing in terms of next steps, what they can do going forward. If Anna, you want to start?
Sure. For me, a lot of times the most impactful thing I found that I share with people is that people with disabilities represent at least 15% of the world population. It's a really simple stat and we say it all the time, but so many non-disabled people or people outside of the disability community just haven't heard it. And when they hear that and they think of what that means in terms of the people they surround themselves with, it's really, really shocking. And it kind of leads them to kind of change their perspective. And you do have to kind of elaborate and say, this doesn't mean that there's 15% of your population that's wheelchair users hiding somewhere. Disabilities come in a lot of different ways. And a lot of times you won't even know if someone has a disability by just looking at them. So this includes a lot of people whether or not you know that they have disabilities. It also includes a lot of people who you might not be seeing because they are stuck at home due to inaccessibility and things like that. So for me, that's usually when I tend to see the wheels start turning in people's heads.
Yeah.
Great. And yeah, I wrote down the 15% earlier too, just to 15 plus, maybe we can.
Yeah, it's definitely
Right.
higher in a lot of developing countries.
Yeah.
And in the US even, the CDC found that 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. So we're still working on the statistics. We just know it's a lot.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Anna. And how about you, Esma?
Yes, and especially in the post-war and post-conflict countries where a lot of people actually became disabled later in their lives. For me, I would say it's like 3 or 4 C's. So that approach that the universities or exchange organizations should take. And it is care, curiosity, meaning being open-minded to find new things and to learn, and also courage to ask the questions to a disabled student, because not everyone is, let's say, empowered in the same way and capable of self-advocacy of the same level. And also just don't assume things. For example, when I transferred to my second university, they offered me to take my exams orally. And I said well, with theoretical classes, it's fine. But I also would have to solve the legal cases. And these come in a very specific form that you have to learn how to write and practice. And without doing this and developing this skill, my education, I said, would be really worthless. So yeah, I just would say these 3 C's, let's say, that need to be. And also accessibility for people with disabilities might mean accessibility for much more people in general, and inclusiveness and acceptance of individual needs and consideration of individual needs in general. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Esma. I know the Clearinghouse team will definitely take all of your words into our practices and our work that we do, and not just share it right now, but continue to share your messages going forward. So thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences and your words with all of us. And yeah, joining from Georgia and DC or Jersey, not 100%.
Jersey for now, DC
Jersey,
on Monday.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you both so much. I know it's going to be difficult for me to follow up with that, but I did want to wrap up with some next steps that we always like to do after reflecting off this incredible program that we've had the last few weeks. And I've learned a lot. I think everybody's learned a lot and heard from so many people about what is being done towards disability inclusion and what still needs to happen. As I share some ideas, please feel free to chat in the box as well with some ideas that you have, maybe reflecting over the last 2 weeks of what you want to do going forward. And for us, you know, first goal is that we want this community to grow. The conversations have to continue and have to turn into practice. And so some of the ideas that I have going forward, especially since I was emotional yesterday with it ending and it was like, I don't want it to stop. So first, the Clearinghouse will be holding its Joining Hands Symposium next summer. So that was the one that was planned this summer. So we still will be having that in DC with Gallaudet. So already, you know, plan on that happening. We don't have a confirmed date, but stay tuned for those things and news coming up, but do know that that is in the works. And we also want to continue to build this community that we've built through this virtual platform to engage and share the resources and information and growing practices for inclusion. We're going to, I think, you know, we want to maintain this virtual reach. And, you know, we've attracted almost 1,000 registrants. And so maybe not 1,000 people were attending all the sessions, but we still attracted that many people to want to learn more and to join this community with all the information that's going out through the messages and the emails in this community. So what we're going to do is turn this virtual Joining Hands, just 2-week virtual platform, into an ongoing thing to keep that virtual Joining Hands platform. Our idea is to create this as an ongoing seasonal webinar so we can continue to keep this group together and still replicate the different activities we've been doing, inviting session presenters, maybe movies, forums for people to discuss and share more of what's going on in their field today. So this will look like a virtual Joining Hands spring webinar series or virtual Joining Hands fall webinar series. And so through a longer time, like 4 months or a seasonal time frame, then we'll create these programming to share with all of you so you can know how to join and how to be involved and to continue to be part of these discussions. You know, once we turn off Zoom today, it doesn't mean that we stop for good. So we'll definitely reach out and share more information with you through the surveys and the communication going forward. And I do request that you complete our surveys that we'll be sending out to you next week and just share your experience. Be honest with what you want to see going forward, what was helpful, what was not helpful, what are some takeaways for yourself, and you know, that will help us as we continue to build this going forward. continue to connect with the Clearinghouse and our free resources and services, and follow our ongoing initiatives, and focus on disability inclusion and international exchange. I think that's all I've got to share. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I hope you all have enjoyed and benefited from these last 2 weeks, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon. And to close, I attended our last session, which is on our Clearinghouse's access to exchange externship. And, you know, it was a quick window when we were wrapping up that session and getting started for this one. But one of the things one of our externs said just kind of was perfect timing, and just how I feel, you know, this is such an important time to continue the work that we're doing. But our extern, Jonna Wright, when she was talking about her externship and participating in international exchange, said, "Every time I go abroad, I just feel this sense of empowerment and pride in myself and in the disability community. Seeing that we're able to go abroad and that you always have people with the disability community to support you if you ever need anything while you're abroad." And so this statement, I felt, wrapped it up of, we have to continue to do more and continue to build this community of practice that we've started now. So on that note, I would love to invite everybody to turn their videos on if you want to for a final goodbye. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we hope to see you again very soon. And we'll get a photo. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's good to see everybody. Jenny, everybody. All right, we're all taking pictures. Smile. Thank you, and I hope to stay connected and see you all again very, very soon. Bye, everybody. Yeah, of course, for sure.